Hi there. So let's talk about the general characteristics of African art. And of course, this is a bit of a dangerous topic to broach right on the start because I don't want you to assume that this is universally true of all African art. But when we look across the broad spectrum of what we find in Africa, many of the works do share some common qualities. And I think it's worthwhile to sort of think about those as they address certain sort of basic concerns that come up time and time again. And again, some of those concerns are directly related to our earlier lecture on geography and the overriding nature of human cultures in Africa. So let's look at some African art. When we see African art, it's easy to be kind of sort of stunned and overwhelmed by the novelty of it, the unique and imaginative qualities that seem so otherworldly, so surprising and different than any art that you've seen or grown up with or familiar with. It has certain visceral, physical qualities that are unmistakable, but very hard to articulate because the aesthetic ideas and choices are so very different from your typical sort of Western-oriented artwork. And that's what makes it valuable, because it really challenges us in our perceptions of what we think of as art, and also challenges us in our perceptions of what we think of as possible in human expression and communication. So one of the key features we find in African art is this extraordinary innovation of form, that even within a certain tradition, a very specific kind of art by a particular people, we see a very imaginative variety of interpretations. So that even a tradition that has a fairly limited range visual symbols and ideas, it can be manipulated and elaborated on in a huge number of ways. Each individual artist sort of bringing to it their own creative vocabulary. And this is one of the things that makes African art so unique, is that you can see traditions that have been around for hundreds of years, if not longer. And we can see within them this enormous range of human innovation and change. The other thing about African art, which is also very startling, is its penchant for visual abstraction, that it isn't satisfied imitating things as they appear, but seems to be searching for some more essential, basic kind of shape or form to communicate the idea, willing to break down an idea into a kind of basic visual shape or texture, and that kind of broad, dramatic way of communicating is very startling, especially if you've kind of been brought up to think that all art needs to be realistic or an imitation of something real. Another very interesting quality about African art is what we call parallel asymmetries. So there is symmetrical along the lateral line, but on the vertical line, there is this change that occurs. So there's a sense of order in the design, but there's also a kind of surprising variety at the same time. This is sort of like our own human body. We have, a symmetrical, and we our arms and limbs and eyes hang off our form. Likewise, there is that same tendency in African art to create that kind of parallel asymmetries in the statuary and sculpture. And that leads us to our next observation, is that sculpture is really a very dominant form of communication. Especially in ancient times, painting, unless it's body painting and adornment, is not a primary form of communication. That a lot of the work that we'll be looking at is sculptural in nature, and very often is cut and carved from a single block of wood, giving it a kind of sturdy, durable form. So there's this kind of ways in which sculpture sort of embodies an idea in a physical form. And a lot of it has to do with, again, this sort of reference to human form or animal forms and recreating those in 3 dimensions. A very important aspect of African art is its connection to memory and cultural sites where people can recall and come back to key ideas in the culture so that people can remember them and pass them on. And often these objects are what we call mnemonic devices, meaning they're sort of there to evoke or inspire memories of things. And this is important in many African cultures that don't have writing. Pre-literate societies require their art to hold the memories that they don't have held in books or other kinds of texts. And so this is a very important way in which art serves as an important tool for recalling and recreating their past. Another very important way in which the past is recalled is to have it be embodied. And so there's a kind of performance, playing a role, acting out a part. And of course, African masks and costumes are some of the most exciting forms of art we'll find on the continent. Another very interesting quality about the sort of masks and forms, puppets even, is the way in which they embody kind of human animals and animal humans. This we see, very broadly in Egyptian art, but also elsewhere across the continent. The animal and the human share in this kind of role playing of important values and ideas. Likewise, we often see a kind of composites of animals, an overlay of symbols and ideas, so that something doesn't just mean one thing or communicate one idea, that its power and its potency and its evocational ability to communicate is that it's actually layered in many, many ways. And it sort of evokes a kind of constellation of ideas in its form. And then lastly, there is a really interesting use of materials in the way that they are sort of reclaimed, borrowed, recycled. A form or a piece of material in one context might come back and be reused, remade. On the example on the right, the kente cloth was originally made from Chinese silks that had been unwoven and then rewoven into their own patterns and designs. And again, the idea of nails and the idea of metals that came in, were imported from Europe, played a key role in defining new ideas about how these materials conveyed meaning to them in their lives. So here's some questions for you. Why is African art primarily sculptural? Why is African art often a tool for memory? How does the way materials are used or reused change the meaning of the work? How does the human body influence the character of African art? Again, these are questions only for your own cognition. Think about them. If you don't think you know the answer, maybe it's time to go back and review the lecture again.